Go. Hey, it's great to meet you.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm very grateful.
Are you in Ohio?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Cincinnati, Ohio.
excellent. Cincinnati, yeah. And I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. So we're the states that determine every election.
Yes. It's interesting because I heard some of your talks before, and they always reference Kansas. So when I came to the US, the first state we came to was Kansas.
Okay.
And I was a Shawnee Mission High School.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of alumni that came out of there.
Yes, so that was my first year, and I was a senior. And then last year, when I was inducted in the Teacher Hall of Fame, it's out of Emporia, Kansas.
Oh, okay.
Full
One,
circle, yes.
yeah. One of my favorite people on the planet is actually a writing professor, the head of the writing program at Emporia State.
Okay.
And he was actually the poet laureate of Kansas for a few years. So, Kevin Rabus, he's a wonderful human being. So, yeah.
Amazing.
But it's weird because, and you probably know this, when I talk about Kansas City, people immediately think Kansas, but I'm in Kansas City, Missouri.
Yeah.
It's very confusing, but it's a technicality, so it's all good. So, I must tell you up front, my day job is as an IT technician for a school district. My wife is a fifth grade teacher, so I'm totally interwoven into the school world. So just so you know, um,
Okay.
yeah. So, but it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
I'm very grateful.
So, I want to begin our conversation with something that impacted education and continues to send ripples through the system. Living through a pandemic. How did you get through that 3.5 year period, and how did it change you?
It was really tough. And what was hard was after the lockdown, well, during the lockdown, we needed to teach remotely. And the struggle that I had were two things. One is I wasn't really versed in technology. And the other part was not all the students would log on at the time that they needed to. And the other part, the third part that was a challenge were students who were struggling at home because a lot of time now children were needed to do more at home help and whether in the past also when you have a child complaining about issues at home, any abuse, well, we can report it, but now we wondering, we can feel it but we can't really pinpoint it. I couldn't understand if this is an issue, is it, how do you do it? And one time at midnight, I needed to reach out to the school counselor and I needed to, what do I do? Because it needed to be reported. So that was really, really tough. So I was, in one way, I was scared to go back to school in person because, they talked about a lot of time where our teachers were uh, dying from the pandemic. And really, when I went in person, anytime I hear about somebody getting COVID in my classroom, I start counting backward 14 days. But it was a lot less of an anxiety because now, if there's an issue, I knew that I can report it. I knew that I was doing the right thing. I knew what to do. The pandemic was a struggle, and what I came out of that was what two things is I vow to never, call myself a tech dinosaur. I felt like if I'm not good at it, I am going to do whatever it takes to become better at it. I'm going to study, I'm going to put in the effort because it's not like I can go to the next, my colleague and say, hey, can you help me? What can I do with that? The principal knowing that I really don't know everything, it became that I really needed to know genuinely, authentically, and professionally that I needed to do this. And the other thing is I couldn't get away with not developing connections. As a new teacher several years ago in the 90s, when first of all, I did not go to school in the US K through 12. And I remember my first day as a school, my principal was dancing and she was so excited. She found out that I don't need a mentor. Something about my teaching license, I had a master's degree, I have a lot of credit hours, but it does not mean I don't need a mentor. But what it learned from that, what it translated to me is that we don't need to work together. And growing up in North Africa, watching my grandmother doing the laundry, coordinating with the neighbors, and they share stories and they do singing, and I thought, oh, we definitely got it wrong. And we have a saying like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go further, go in company. Like, who needs that? We need to go fast. And so I found myself becoming perfectionist and learning so many different skills. And we hear about colleagues from other teachers saying, I wear many hats. And I'm like, I don't see her wearing any hats, because I was translating in my head, like my English wasn't good and I didn't understand what she meant. But eventually I learned that educators take on many roles, but that's because we don't collaborate. We don't work together. We take on the roles of other people, and we end up diluting our role as educators. And imagine going to a doctor and say, well, what is your specialty? Because you have a need for yourself or a loved one, and they say, well, I'm a doctor, but I have to be the nurse, I have to be the custodian, I have to be the cook, because they don't do their job, and I have to fund out of a lot of things out of my pocket. I'm like, you will run for your life. And that's what we do as educators every day. We are taking on so many roles, and whether we think it's noble, or for me, I didn't have a role model. I didn't have the skills on how to collaborate. In fact, when parents don't come, we do nothing about it. We have the open house, we have the parent teacher conference. And one day I said, this is going to change. I am not going to do this. I am going to go reach out. I created a not-for-profit Parents to Partners to help both the educators and the parents on how to collaborate with each other for the success of the children. Because I know what it's like as an immigrant parent. I didn't go to the parent meetings most of the times because I thought I was not needed. I thought I have nothing to offer. I thought my contribution was not needed. I thought I didn't want to interfere. Why am I there? Let the teachers do their job. They're better at it. I didn't even go to school here. I did not realize the power of partnership. And because of that, because I didn't have visibility, my children got bullied mercilessly. And once I understood the power of collaboration, and I started coming to school, volunteering, having visibility, that was self-esteem to my children, but I was able to give them better guidance. Instead of, oh, you're getting bullied, let me sign you up for martial arts, which is what a lot of parents think they need to do. We don't need to do that. We just need to have visibility. We need to collaborate more often. We need to connect. We need to help each other. We need to support each other.
I agree. My son is 18. He's in the extended program, but he's special needs. He's on the spectrum. So I've been very interconnected his entire life with IEP teams and making sure that we partner up. And I can vow that that's been a huge part of keeping things going and steady and making sure that everybody understands where we're at. So it's a pretty big deal.
You are very lucky. And a lot of times parents, even I've heard colleagues say something like, well, this parent didn't come because they don't care. And that's when I thought, wow, that's not the reason, because I teach ESL. So we work with diverse families, we work with refugees, with immigrants, English learners. I saw, because for me, and a lot of the time we don't realize the power. Like you had you have a gift to share with the school, and I wished I had known about that. I wish a lot of parents knew about that. Like, when I see these kids being bullied, one time I saw a kid being bullied in the cafeteria, when one kid was dressed up and was an athletic, was straight A student, and he takes his dirty tray and shoved this kid and said, all right, you are going to go clean this. Like, I was so fuming, because as a parent, I've seen it. So I go to the counselor and I say, okay, this kid got bullied by this. And the answer was, actually, you're not qualified. Like, what do you mean I'm not qualified? I'm a teacher. I've seen it happening. Now the kid has to come in person and do this. So I go to the kid and like, okay, I can go with you. And he goes, no, I don't want to do this. What? I'm going to be there. And I felt very frustrated because the bullying didn't end. And what I learned is that when kids go to complain, a lot of these kids go with a lot of emotion because they're hurt, because they're upset, because and they're not articulate. Whereas when the bully goes in, they're confident, they go, I didn't do it. Of course, we're gonna believe the kid who's a straight A, the kid who's in sports, the kid who's better dressed. And the difference is, a lot of the time it's that kid's parents, because he's in sport and good grades, going to have a lot more prominence in school versus the other kid. And now I really believe that our kids can be less vulnerable when we have a presence in the school.
Yeah.
And part of creating the not-for-profit, it's a labor of love. It's an organization called Parents to Partners, where nobody gets paid. That way all the funds, all the grants, all anything that we get goes to the parents to offer the training. And only to what we do is, how can we empower the parents with a language, how to speak with the educators, or how educators can reach out instead of waiting for them to come, because a lot of time there is a disconnect, whether it's communication or cultural disconnect.
So the one thing I think that's very unique now too is that a lot of these kids are really stunted because they were away for so long. Um, when do you think that gap might close up, or do you think it's always going to be there for these kids?
It really doesn't have to be. My stepson, when I met them, I got married. He was in first grade and he was in Title I. So his reading literacy was below his friends. And first of all, I was very surprised. Like, both parents are educated. How can you have a kid who is lagging in literacy? Here's a parent who's reading to him every night. But sometimes any disruption, any, like, it can be a divorce or any kind of trauma, it's going to impact the learning. My idea was, what if we read every single night? What if we go to the library every single week? What if we create a theme and I was trying to help them with math by taking a cookbook and making uh, treats. And now that kid, he is 21 years old. He was in the honors program. He went from Title I to the gifted learning. He was advancing. It can be done. But the best way to really achieve that, I found from all the students, it is not enough to count on the school. We need to do something at home, and it needs to be a focus. Anything you want to improve, they say where focus goes or energy goes, something about focus goes, energy flows. Anything you become mindful and say, I want to improve this area, you are going to achieve it. Whether you take your child to library regularly, reading with your child, reading to your child, you're going to improve that area. But I think if we just count on the school, it's really difficult, especially if the child at home is going to be fully immersed in games and in their phone and all kinds of electronics. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. So let's get an exact handle on what you do on a daily basis as a professional. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day. And one of the kids says, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that child?
I would say, well, I'm like your teacher, teaching, but my students are teachers, are educators. I'm a speaker. I train educators. They're not going to understand what is grant writing. So I train educators on how to collaborate with the community, how to work with others, because we want, like you are working with your peers. I go to these conferences. It's like a large classroom with a lot of people, and I want them to be inspired, which means I want them to leave so happy knowing that they can be very successful with their students.
So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
I wanted to work for the airline industry because I wanted to travel the world. And I did that. I worked for American Airlines. I learned so much from being there. And that's how I paid for my master's degree for my education. I did all the roles, fueling the aircraft, de-icing the aircraft. But as I guess I thought it would be so much more. I remember the first day getting there, I'm like, is this it? You know, I was expecting so much more. I loved it. And then I realized I cannot travel working for the airline because you can only travel as standby for free anywhere in the world, but
Uh,
it will never be a priority if you travel. I never heard of accounts of people who went to Hawaii and couldn't come back for 3 weeks because the seats were always, full. I got a chance to travel frequently, but that's just to get drug tested in Chicago. So, um, but I had some trouble, but I got a lot of experience. I remember on the last day of our training, one student asked our teacher, and she said, "You mean I have to say 187 times, thank you for flying with American?" And the teacher said, "Yes, but your client will hear it only once."
yeah.
And that really stuck with me to in the classroom. How can you treat people in a classroom full of people like they matter?
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So let's go back to where you were born and raised and how these seeds of education got into you and this thirst for seeing the world. How did those seeds become who you are today?
I grew up in North Africa. We have our own dialect, but because of colonialism, we speak French. When I came to the US, from the time we arrived, people came to me asking to practice Spanish. I would say, "Oh, I don't know it." And the answer usually is, "You're very funny," or "You should become a comedian." Eventually, I learned Spanish mostly to avoid disappointing people. I taught ESL, I taught Japanese for a few years, but then one day my principal says, "We need you to teach your language." And I thought, even I don't care about my language. So I went back to clarify, like, what would that be? And he said, "Well, Spanish." So I became certified in Spanish. And so in 2020, I was named the Ohio Teacher of the Year as the ESL and Spanish teacher. So now I can't convince anybody in my state that I'm not Hispanic. And then I was the National Teacher, Toyota, for Family Teacher of the Year. Like, now I can't convince anybody. So it's okay. I
Yeah.
love all the cultures. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And I learned a lot.
So who's been kind of a hero or an inspiration in your life?
My hero, I guess my mother and my grandmother, they both of them were illiterate. They did not go to school because they grew up during the unrest, social unrest. My grandmother during World War One, my mother World War Two, uh, and I admire their strength and willingness to take risks. And I employed that as a teacher. In my first year as a teacher, my principal called me to his office to tell me there's no budget for my department, which meant no textbooks, no school supplies, and some of my students could not afford a pencil. And I thought it was a sign for me to leave the district. That maybe meant either leaving the district or the profession. And I had one kid. The school announced that one day there's going to be the next day would be the coldest with our first snowfall. So one kids were asking me to please teach outside. I'm African. I'm not going to teach outside in the cold. So I thought, why not? They begged and they were, please, please, like, it's fine. So not only I agreed to teach outside, I took hot chocolate. We went outside, and on the way back, one of the kid, I saw him really packing this snowball, and I says, if you hit me with that snowball, I will see you after school. And he said, "Oh, it's worth it." He hit me. And I said, "Well, I guess I'll see you after school." He came and he was so excited. He cleaned the classroom, mopped the floor, and I said, "You can go home." And he wouldn't. He sharpened the pencil, took the trash, did the recycling. "You can go home now." 60 minutes later, and I felt like, now I'm the one, I feel detained. Please go home. 90 minutes later. And he says, well, can you hook me with a ride? I drove him and I dropped him off. And as I made a turn, there was a sign that said, carry home for the orphans. And I could not breathe. I realized at that moment that kids deeply want to connect, even if it means consequences. And I thought, I can't leave because I can't take these kids. But how can I teach in a way that these kids get the opportunity that other schools? I wanted to teach as if I were the richest person I knew, or maybe rich in spirit. And what I learned to do was to asking the community. I let the students, one year my students wanted to build a Japanese garden. They learned about the Japanese American experience, and they felt like this is so unfair. And they were really generally upset, and it reminded me of me being in the principal's office. And when he called me actually that day, I thought he was going to terminate me because in the US, first year teachers, they don't have to renew the contract. But he told me there was no budget for my department. So I didn't want him to leave that upset. And their idea was to build this Japanese garden. And I remember that year I brought a plastic plant and I put it next to the heat register. It turned brown. I killed a plastic plant. So clearly I'm not a candidate for this garden project. And I all I could do, the bell rang, and I said, I don't have gardening supplies. The next day, every kid walked in with a shovel, and one kid had a wheelbarrow with his friends piled on this wheelbarrow. Like, well, looks like we're going to be gardening. And I reached out and I asked my students to help me, reached out to the community, and we built this amazing garden. The value of it was $18,000. It had a pond, it had koi, it had these stone lanterns that were shipped from Japan. The whole community came together. And the following year, we created the largest quilt in the US. It's 18 by 41, 19 by 41 for the year 1941 when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And the entire quilt was made from from clothes worn by the Japanese American veterans who fought in the US. We started out with a bake sale, which was like a drop in the bucket for this project, but it created a movement. And we used all the money from the bake sale and car washes to buy stamps to mail it out to people all over the US. And we found that even people who are Japanese who didn't fight during World War II, they knew somebody and they connected it. And we were able to create this project. And a year from now, we raised $1 million worth to create a skating rink that is still in existence. So I learned that as an educator, just because we don't have something, it does mean that we can only restrict our students to what we know, that we can reach out to the community and to the parents, that everybody wants to help. And I found the secret to getting the help is, well, first of all, never take credit for an idea. So for me, I never say this is my idea. I'd give it to the students and name the kid. And because people really want to help children succeed. And the other one is looking for ways that we can reciprocate. So a lot of time I notice whenever I go to any networking event, I come home with maybe so many, like 50, 100 business cards. And I don't remember who the people are, like no matter how much I try. And I try to take note, but some people have these glossy or black or very expensive or circular or these fancy things. Like, what am I going to do with this? And I found that as an educator, because I'm cheap, I'm going to spend I'd rather buy a kid lunch than use it to buy business cards. I can write my name on a napkin and still make a connection. So it's really about making a connection, an authentic connection, but finding ways to reciprocate. So for me, if somebody comes to help me in my classroom to be, for example, a guest speaker, like right after we come back from the lockdown, there were a lot of racism in my school. And I remember one day I was going to the office and one kid blamed the Chinese for the pandemic. And to me, that was an issue for two reasons. One, we had Chinese. And two, I don't want the kids to go out in the community with that mindset. So I wanted to invite guests, Chinese guests. It cannot be any guest. It had to be a Chinese, not somebody who's been to China. And I reached out to an organization in the community and they said, well, it's going to be $150 an hour. I don't have $150 an hour, but I still wanted my kids to have this opportunity. So I reached out to the different, on LinkedIn, and I thought, how can I reciprocate? Even though I teach in a school, Title I, we don't have the funds. What can I do? And a lot of time we think we have nothing to offer, but really we have a lot to give. So I thought, I said I can ask the parents of my students, get permission for you to take photos. You can use that on your social media. I can recognize you in our school social media and tell me what else I can do. If there's anything I can volunteer for you, I will do it. You tell me what it was. And I found that people always accept. And whenever a lot of time people, when they go to networking, they're always thinking about what can I get from you? How can I get you to do something for me? And that is the wrong way to go about it. Instead, for me, when I go, is I think, what can I do to help you? What can I do to elevate you? How can I empower you? How can I give, whether it's me or my students? How can we elevate you? And don't think about what can I get out of it, because think about just building a connection. Because if I offer you my best and I help you, when I need you, my students need you, maybe I need you to be a guest speaker in my class, I can count on you to be that person. But I don't go to people putting on my, I have 20,000 followers now on LinkedIn, but it didn't happen because I'm asking people to do things for me. These are genuine relationships. And think about serving, just think about serving, think about giving your best. And
Yeah.
then, when I need something, I'm hoping you will be able to reciprocate.
Yeah. So if anyone out there wants to reach out, learn more about you, anything about your world, what's the best way to do that?
I have a website, Leila Kubesch, .com and Leila Kubesch at Gmail. So if they need anything, I can help anyone succeed anyway. I am always ready to rise to the occasion.
Excellent, Leila. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your time. This has been very illuminating.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be on your show and very grateful. And even to you too, if you need anything, please reach out.
Absolutely. Sure. Well, thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.